Tropical disturbance gathering pace, but in an unusual part of the world for this time of year, on today's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for May 14. We still have 3 areas of interest that we're monitoring right now, the same ones as we had yesterday, but their fortunes are changing. Indeed, in the Southwest Indian Ocean, that system has the highest chance of development still right now, and those chances have increased, and it's looking pretty good. We'll get to that in a moment. First of all, it's 18 days until the Atlantic hurricane season begins, and there's no areas of interest to look at right now, but there are a few clouds and thunderstorms brewing off the Gulf Coast of the United States. But in general, certainly tropical-wise, things are still looking pretty desolate. But it's still very early on and the season hasn't started. It's just one solitary day until the East Pacific hurricane season begins, and we've still got the area of interest that we've tagged at 30% chance there for potential development, and that's what the National Hurricane Center were going with as well. I don't know if that's still the case, but their update yesterday had 30%. In the West Pacific, we've just slightly bumped that one up to 20% here, this area of interest that could be developing near the Micronesian islands and could be moving closer towards Guam than what the previous system might have done last week that failed to fire. North Indian Ocean looking pretty quiet, but some storms off southern India. Australian region is very quiet now, and there's nothing going on in this area anymore. I think we'll stop showing most of these southern hemisphere slides tomorrow when we get the start of the East Pacific hurricane season, so look at them whilst you can. This is the Southwest Indian Ocean, which we'll obviously still be looking at tomorrow because we've got this area of interest that we've put up to 70% chance right now. Meteo France also giving it a high chance of development. All models seem to have this system developing now into at least a tropical depression, but probably a tropical storm, at least for a short time as it drifts northwestwards. In the South Pacific, it's completely bare and quiet now, no areas of interest here, and we haven't really had much going on there for a little while now in the South Pacific. Sometimes you can get a surprise storm in May, and sometimes even a strong one like Donna back in 2017, but not this time. So this is Invest 92S, that's the designation of this system. It's currently 213 kilometers east of Farquhar Atoll, 371 west of Agalega, 477 northeast of Antsiranana in northern Madagascar, 588 from Astove, and 730 from Grande Terre in the western group of the Seychelles. Yes, some of those places do sound familiar because they were areas that Hidaya was affecting, especially out west there, and so this system could be tracking close to those areas once again. Let's take a look at the latest satellite imagery, and here is the system starting to take hold. It's looking very sloppy on the north and eastern side, but towards the south and the west it's looking pretty good, where we've got big bursts of convection now occurring, and it is looking almost like a bona fide tropical cyclone. It is producing at least 30 knot winds, that's 35 miles per hour depicted by ASCAT. It didn't catch the west side of it underneath all that convection, unfortunately. It was mainly the east and a little bit of the south side. Its circulation needs to improve a little bit more though before we designate it. Here's the Eastern Pacific. There's general disturbances all around there right now, some little warm-ups before the actual system arrives. We think that system there, all that big burst of convection there near Panama, is going to be eventually this Eastern Pacific system if it does develop. So keep watching that one very closely. West Pacific is still looking awfully quiet here, but we do expect to see a disturbance popping out of some of those clouds very close to the equator and start to move northwards. This is the Western Atlantic, just having a little look there at the southeastern United States with those storms brewing and pushing along towards the east. A slight risk in effect today in northern Florida and I think southern Georgia. And then here's another view of the Caribbean, focusing on the Caribbean with that system on the southern side there, really over Colombia and into the Eastern Pacific. And this is the Eastern Atlantic there off the coast of Africa, throwing up a few disturbances there right now, but nothing that we're going to be taking heed of. It's still far too early for the main development region yet. Further out over the East Pacific, it's looking like this. There's a few little systems there, but really nothing to talk about in terms of any action. And the Western Pacific, once again, quite a few storms blowing up over Luzon in the Philippines and one or two elsewhere, and a big frontal system moving through the Ryukyu Islands and through Japan right now. And this is the East Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal region and the Indochina region there. Pretty sloppy across the whole region, thunderstorms almost anywhere in that zone. And a final close-up there of that potential cyclone there in the Southwest Indian Ocean, drifting towards Madagascar right now. Sea surface temperatures are looking good in the Eastern Pacific and are still improving, of course, up to 31 or 32 degrees maybe in some parts of the region there where that potential system could be forming. In the Atlantic, those waters are really starting to get warm in parts of the Gulf of Mexico. May really is all change, and June as those temperatures start to really take a hike upwards. And the Western and Caribbean there, 29 degrees in quite a few spots now. Western Pacific also still increasing and improving as well. South China Sea has always been hot, but the Philippine Sea is catching up, and those warm temperatures moving through the southern Ryukyu Islands and off the eastern coast of Taiwan. In the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal is still sizzling with temperatures of 32 degrees Celsius over a large part of their sub-basin and in the Andaman Sea, and temperatures really starting to increase even on the northern coastlines there of India now. In the Arabian Sea, it's also catching up there too. Southwest Indian Ocean, those sea surface temperatures near this potential cyclone are cooling a little bit, but they're still about 28 degrees Celsius, if not more, so it's still looking good for this system. And in the Australian region, there's still 3 small banks of 29 degrees Celsius waters there off the Kimberley, off Darwin, and in the Gulf of Carpentaria. But those temperatures are generally, of course, on the decline. South Pacific, temperatures decreasing here as well, but there's still a few hot pockets there, mainly in the very low latitudes, equatorial region even. So let's take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. You can see the cool pool continuing there in the Eastern Pacific in the equatorial zone, sign of this potential La Nina, but elsewhere it's generally above average, particularly in the Atlantic main development region, which is running at least 3 degrees above. In the Western Pacific it's around 1 to 2 degrees above, and in the Indian Ocean, where that potential system is, it's around 2 degrees above average as well. Bay of Bengal, another hot spot there. The South Pacific and Australian region is near average. Oceanic heat content looks like this for the South Pacific. Still a few decent areas there with a lot of energy still on offer, but no systems to take advantage of it would seem. North Pacific, well, you see the East Pac really starting to get going there with a good few spots now of very conducive conditions. And in the Western Pacific, really good off the coast of the Philippines. It's really starting to get fired up, ready for the upcoming season. And in the Atlantic, similar as well, but it takes a little while longer for the northern reaches of the Atlantic to get warmed up, like the Gulf of Mexico. There's a big land barrier there, but the Caribbean Sea is looking pretty good with some very high values near Jamaica. Let's check the computer models then. This is what the GFS has in store for the next 5 days. First of all, looking at the Eastern Pacific, where we have this potential system forming. Does it form within the 5-day period? I think you'll find, yes, it does, just about. There it is, tropical storm, and then it starts to move westwards. Interestingly, some of the models have been faltering a little bit in the last run or two, so could that be a sign that it may not be as strong or as interesting as what we first thought? Not sure, and it looks like it will be further away from land as well, which is obviously good news. Here's the Western Pacific system. Does that form within the 5-day period? I think the answer again will be yes. There it is, starting to develop over the central Micronesian islands. You might see Guam just up there as well, and it's heading towards there. Category 2 within 5 days there, very bullish from the GFS, but we know it's been crying wolf before, not just last week, but in other times as well. So do we believe that for 1 second? I am not sure yet. That's why we're only giving it 20%. And this is this other system in the Southwest Indian Ocean. It does take a while to get its center of circulation going, but it does eventually get there and becomes a tropical storm there. And it's moving slowly towards the northwest, and then it really does start to get itself sorted, but it does stall, so you'd imagine it doesn't have very long once the storm is in that stalling position before conditions really start to turn against it. It could be over some of those small islands that we mentioned before as it does that, so we need to watch out for that. As for rainfall expectations, they are still expected to be very high, maybe not quite as high as what we had in yesterday's forecast, but anywhere where the storm might be stalling, you could see a chance of getting up to 1,000 millimeters of rain. But as it is right now, some of those small islands could receive maybe half that, 500 millimeters, maybe as a worst case scenario. But any substantial land masses aren't going to be getting that much rain. The biggest one I can see there is Grande Terre, which is going to be getting around, what was it, 5 inches there, which is around 125 millimeters. Parts of Madagascar will get little bits here and there as well, especially along the east coast. Well, into the longer range, we see the further progress of the Eastern Pacific storm, and it does move along the usual channels now westwards and becomes a hurricane there for a little bit, borderline hurricane although, and then it continues moving westwards, and then it starts to weaken off, and eventually it does die off in the long range, which we won't be showing because it's not that interesting. But there it is, almost a due west movement once it gets around the Gulf of Tehuantepec, and possibly other low pressure systems competing with it in its initial phase. And in the Western Pacific, further on this system, it passes quite close to Guam. You know, it could even deliver typhoon conditions to Guam on this particular run, and then it moves off northwestwards, becomes a Category 4 again, and then turns northwards. So that's what the previous forecast was saying, but it's also what the ones last week were saying. GFS had Category 4. What did we get? Nothing. So we'll see what happens with that one. It's still too early to tell. And on that southwest Indian Ocean system, it still can't make up its mind. Weak steering currents clearly, and it eventually capitulates, and that's what would happen to any storm that stalls for too long, and it dies off and its remnants stay out to sea as well. There are some model scenarios though that hold on the storm for a little bit longer, and it moves northwestwards towards northern Tanzania and even Kenya. Would you believe that? If that happened, that would be a sight to see, but I would say at the moment it is very unlikely. Scan the barcode and that will take you through to the Force 13 merch store, where you can take a look at all our items as well as our full season and individual animations on request. Lovely. And are still waiting for a Hode t-shirt because that blasted storm still won't form. Just one item in the silly range, and that's the continuation of that Western Pacific typhoon on the GFS. There it is, continuing north and then northeastwards. It thinks about striking Japan there as a typhoon, but it eventually just sidles eastwards and then out into the extratropical zone, which would be a little bit more typical of a May track, although not that many storms in May even get this far north. But there it is, going along decently, and then it takes a little turn eastwards, and then that really is where the weakening begins. Still massive question marks about that though. On this day, a scenario that was a little bit more likely, but it did put us into a strong and a shock of a start to the Western Pacific season in 2020. It was Typhoon Vongfong, which was peaking as a Category 3 just before making landfall in the central to northern Philippine Islands, and we covered that storm extensively as well on Force 13's coverage on May the 14th, and can you believe it's 4 years ago. But time marches on. Well, let's go back to today then, and 92S being the prominent feature. We are still code unclassified on TCOS. The first name on this Atlantic hurricane season in 18 days is Alberto, unless we get it earlier. In the Eastern Pacific, could it be Aletta on the way? And in the Central Pacific, the next name is still Hone. 16 storms so far in 2024. In the West Pacific, the next name is Iwinia, and in the North Indian Ocean, it's going to be Remal. Of course, in the Southern Hemisphere, the names will change once we get to July 1st, rolling over into the new season. But in the Australian region, they stick with the naming list, so the next name will still be Robin no matter what. In the Southwest Indian Ocean, the next name is Iyali, and in the South Pacific, it's going to be Pitta. That's all from today's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow.
Become an Ultimate Fan today.